Oh, hey, happy Valentine's Day, yada yada yada. How's that going for you? Oh shit, you got stood up? Dude, same! She said something about not liking dudes with stick limbs. What's her problem? Anyway, I don't have any other plans for today. What about you? None either? Well, I'm sure there's something you could do. You want to hear a story? I don't need to force you to listen this time? Alright then, I'll tell you a redemption story then. A story where I returned to a challenge that had bested me. Allow me to explain. This is not the first time I've covered the Baltic Freikorps in Collapsing World. I covered it back in December, and on my birthday no less. I love this mod, and I liked the 1.0 update despite its flaws, so I wanted to cover another path as soon as possible. I went with the Baltic Freikorps because it caught my attention when I was recording the Rothschild video. It was way harder than I was expecting. I tried 3 times and lost every time. I considered it honorable to show a dud campaign. However, some of the mod devs wanted me to try the Baltic Freikorps again at some point. I tried putting it off, but it isn't going to go away until I actually do it, so it's time for me to redeem myself. I spawned in as the West Russian Volunteer Army. It is guaranteed to collapse about a month after the mod starts. I decided to focus on the Forest Brothers. I tried to do something about the Soviet partisans too, but I ran out of time at the last sec. The Freikorps and the Baltics stormed Riga, capturing the city. Clearly, the Russian government was incompetent, so I switched to the Freikorps. After the other factions rose up, the civil war within a Russian civil war faction began. To make things a touch easier, I allied with the esoteric Rosenberg. I used a bit of forest attacking to secure the last Lithuanian victory point, but once I got it, it was smooth sailing. We occupied Courland and defeated the Soviet partisans, then pushed north to defeat the Bermontian army. After they fell, I ran past the Estonian divisions and secured the north. Just then, Rosenberg inevitably betrayed me, so I had to put him down. Luckily, he went down easily, so I reunited the Baltics. One mistake I made in the last video was doing Germanization of the Baltics too slowly, so as soon as I declared victory, I spread their focuses to start Germanizing the Baltics. This is expensive as hell, as each state needs 30 political power to Germanize, but I need to do it 3 times, costing 90 political power for each state, and steps 2 or 3 also cost available civilian factories, so it's extremely expensive. However, it's very necessary because the Freikorps, after uniting the Baltics, does not get cores on anything except Riga and northern East Prussia. Since everything else is not cored, I don't get full control over their resources, factories, and manpower. Manpower especially is important since, as the Baltic Freikorps, you are strapped for manpower. It's expensive, but very necessary. Germanizing the Baltics is expensive, but also gets even pricier if you want to annex East Prussia from Poland Belarus, because that mechanic eats all your political power. We have a lot of debuffs, which makes sense as we are a low-key murderous paramilitary with a state. I decided to focus on the housing crisis since I didn't want my industrial development to be hurt too badly. While I was doing that, I decided I should consider a new approach regarding the ground army. I figured, considering the Freikorps' precarious position, we needed something different. But what did I do differently? Well, think about it. What was the Freikorps? What is a Freikorps? Why is a Freikorps? Okay, I'll stop that. The point is, it's a militia. It was never a formal organization in real life, just a bunch of anti-communist militias. Why am I telling you this? Because I decided that to win as the Freikorps, I needed to think like the Freikorps. I went with these militia divisions. They have 10 militia battalions, support artillery, and maintenance companies. I went with maintenance rather than engineers because I figured we would be struggling with equipment shortages, as the Baltic Freikorps really doesn't have an industry worth bragging about. As such, maintenance companies can help us get more equipment during wartime. This was a massive gamble. But switching to Hoi 4 videos in the first place was a gamble, and it paid off, so I'm willing to take my chances. After doing all I can to fix the housing crisis for now, I then focused on fixing issues with the ground army. We had a lot, so it was important to fix some of the issues before we invaded Russia. You know how earlier I was talking about how political power was hard to come by? Well, I decided that I needed to choose between Germanization and causing a revolt in East Prussia. Ultimately, I decided that Germanizing the Baltics would be more rewarding in the long term, so I decided to focus on that. Because of that decision, I was able to finish Germanizing Latvia, and I got the focus to get cores on their land. I mentioned earlier that as the Baltic Freikorps, you have little manpower due to the mass murder of minorities. That is the big reason why, as the Baltic Freikorps, you need to choose the Desperate Defense Operations Doctrine, as it gives you a 5% recruitable population. Germanization was going relatively well.
I was making good progress with Estonia. I was almost done Germanizing Estonia, so I figured now would be a good time to get started on Germanizing Lithuania. I decided to do the focus to annex Lithuania because I could Germanize them too, so I get extra cores. I finished Germanizing Estonia and began focusing on Germanizing Lithuania. I figured since Germanization was wrapping up, I could begin supporting East Prussia again. However, I guess that pissed off Tukhachevsky because he even declared war on me before I was ready. This was it. The ultimate test for my experimental militia divisions. If we won, that meant my gamble paid off, and I got humbled real quick as I got pushed back to Riga almost immediately. So that was embarrassing. Turns out militias are complete shit, and you should never use them under any circumstances. I even chose the doctrines that buff militias and still got my ass kicked. Clearly, we needed to have a proper military to counter my enemy's proper military. Furthermore, we needed to do something differently. You see, I noticed a pattern in all my attempts to play Goltz. I keep getting screwed over by Poland. So the solution in the next attempt was simple.
Now you might be wondering what the simple solution is. Well, if Poland is such an issue, then we just need Poland to not exist. How do we accomplish that? Well, simple. Using my magic powers, I was able to convince every Polish person that Tukhachevsky's military district was cringe as fuck, and that they should revolt. Maybe that's cheating, but I can't take it anymore. I need this to be successful in some way so I don't have to come back. Anyway, I did the Civil War again and did Germanization. This one I decided to lock in entirely on Germanization and avoid stirring shit up in East Prussia since political power is important. I did the economic reforms as fast as possible and finished Germanizing Latvia. I then annexed Lithuania and then moved to start army reforms. I was trying to Germanize Estonia and Lithuania at the same time, but it was obviously ineffective. Because Poland Belarus was set to collapse, I don't have to do decisions to cause a revolt in East Prussia. I can justify on East Prussia and Danzig because I have cores on their stuff. I started the war and won pretty fast. I then finished Germanizing Estonia and then got my war goal on Danzig. They were a bit tough due to the Vistula River, but they didn't last long. I was expanding my non-militia army because I did learn my lesson from last time, and I finished Germanizing Lithuania. With my army made bigger and Germanization finished, I began preparing to kill the Soviets. I got the gang together and we declared war on the Soviets. See, if you ask me, this is the kind of conflict that deserves a super event. If the South American War that has no content gets one, but I think the Freikorps and White Army coalition against the Soviets should get one too. After the war started, I noticed that Russia and Turkestan was at war with the Ashan Soviet for some reason, even though Turkestan had gone communist. In my notes I wrote leftist infighting in all caps. I thought my odds would be better this time, but then the same issue I tried to avoid came back to bite me. Poland, during all of this, had been enduring several regional conflicts between several warlords claiming to be the Polish government. And since then, the Polish Regency had proclaimed victory, forming the Polish Kingdom, and thus set out to reclaim the territory of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They had just conquered the remnants of Tukhachevsky's military district and were undoubtedly ready to continue expanding. I hoped they would go for Ukraine first, but they went for me. There was little hope for me, so I decided to load a save and make a new plan. My new plan was to preemptively strike Poland so I could fight Russia without issue. However, I went in without preparing, so I got my ass kicked. I had to load a save again, and again I invaded Poland before they could invade me. Thankfully this time it went pretty well, so I was able to defeat the Polish and establish some puppet government. I figured the front was stable enough, so I refocused on Russia and declared war. With the help of Finland, we were able to push through the north and capture Petrograd. From there, I guess I thought the Soviets would be kinda weak since they were fighting on multiple fronts. As such, I began a big offensive. However, doing big offensives like this against a country like Stalinist Russia, which is very strong mind you, is very costly. Eventually I had to pause my offensive because I ran out of manpower and equipment. I'll be honest, this is the part where I began to realize this attempt was cooked. After I paused my offensive against Stalin, I guess Tukhachevsky's AI noticed that the Polish dissidents were technically gone, so he just did his normal focus tree again and declared war on me. I'm sorry guys, I need to apologize here because I was genuinely going to try lying to you guys by making it look like Tukhachevsky's AI had declared war on Stalin via tagging over to Tukhachevsky and declaring war on Soviet Russia. Yeah, doing this bought me some time, but that ruined this attempt. I was just prolonging the inevitable because I seriously did not want to upload another dud video on this path. However, I still had hope, so I kept playing. After defeating Tukhachevsky, I began a new offensive into Stalinist Russia. We actually had a pretty good start, but this offensive faced the same end as the last one. Stopped because of a lack of supplies and manpower. This was unsustainable, and my allies faced the same problem. Still, despite this, I managed to march on Moscow. However, Russia is a big country with a lot of victory points, so even though Petrograd and Moscow had fallen, we still had a long way to go. The equipment problem was helped by various foreign nations sending us equipment because maybe their AIs are programmed to unleash countries fighting communism. It helped with the equipment deficit, but it could only do so much as the Soviets began an attack in Belarus, which I made several efforts to counter. Sadly, because Stalinist Russia is super strong, there was little I could do to counter its army. By now, Kolchak's Russian state had fallen, and the Comintern could put practically everything it had against me. When I lost Moscow, I decided to call it quits with this attempt. Serves me right for cheating. I won't lie, I felt very demoralized at this point, and my will to play was decreasing. If you count my first video on the Baltic Freikorps, this was my 5th attempt. 5 attempts down the drain, all of them ending in defeat in the same war no less. It didn't help that things weren't going too great for me in real life. On the 6th, I believe, which is one of the days I was recording this video, I received a response from a university that I had applied to. I was told they wouldn't enroll me in their campus, but could instead enroll me in their campus over an hour away, because that one accepted people with a lower GPA. I remember feeling incredibly insulted and hurt by that, so it basically killed my will to play that day, and it was still lingering in my mind the day after. I'm not sure why I'm telling you this, but I guess it's to put into perspective how demotivated I was getting at that point. I wanted to quit so badly, but I didn't want to have to upload another dud campaign of this path. So although I really didn't want to, I decided to try again. Like the last attempt, I set the game rules to have Tukhachevsky's government collapse. However, I also did something that I really didn't want to do but felt I had no choice. I lowered the difficulty. Does this take away some of the challenge? Yes. Do I care? Absolutely not. I don't want to have to cover this path again. I did the Civil War, started Germanizing, and focused on the economy focuses. I settled on a good enough infantry division and put all my units on the Soviet border. I was able to Germanize Latvia and Estonia. I wanted to Germanize Lithuania before the invasion of Russia, but before I started this attempt, I received some critical information from this dude from the Italian Socialist Republic. Turns out, the mod intends for you to invade Russia in 1925. This is something I hadn't taken into account in my previous attempts. I have a bad habit of taking this mod's time prerequisites as suggestions and not, you need to start doing this by this date. It was especially bad in my Kerensky video, where I made it way harder than it had to be because I took my sweet time declaring war on Kolchak. I ended up fighting a war with 56 million casualties in total because I took too long to go to war with Stalin. This time, I decided I would have to start the war in 1925 even if I didn't feel I was fully prepared. This time around, I got lucky. See, it deeply matters who succeeds Vladimir Lenin. The last 2 attempts had a Soviet Russia led by Stalin, but this time, Alexander Bogdanov was appointed. This is important because, for no reason at all, Bogdanov's Russia is so much weaker than Stalin's Russia. I don't know why he's weaker, he just is. Thankfully, because of this, it makes my job much easier. I didn't have all the units I planned on deploying, but once I secured Petrograd with Finland's help and got some additional supplies, it was smooth sailing. Bogdanov did not have nearly enough units, and it really showed. The coalition was more than ready to fight Bogdanov. We were able to just do laps around his units, and because Bogdanov couldn't adequately cover his front line, we were able to capture Moscow once again. I realized just how weak the communists actually were at that moment, since they had gaps everywhere. I decided at that point to just say, fuck it, and told my units to just freestyle it and run around Soviet Russia, taking all the VPs they could. Bogdanov tried to stop me, but there was little he could do. One of my divisions arrived outside Ufa, which was already under attack by Kolchak's forces. At that point, Bogdanov couldn't do anything else and had no choice but to surrender, finally ending the war in a victory for the Baltic Freikorps. As you can see in my notes, I was very happy. This was it. I had been struggling so much with this one fight, and now I had won. I felt so accomplished, but the whole point of redoing the last Goltz video was to reach the end of the focus tree. Finally defeating Soviet Russia gave me enough motivation to continue. The next phase of the mission of the Baltic Freikorps was to go beyond the Baltic. The ultimate goal of Rudiger von der Goltz's detachment of the Freikorps was not only the restoration of the borders of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, but also the reclamation of the German Empire itself. We've come so far. We'd be stupid to stop now. That aside though, I have to say, the pacing here is kind of strange. See, the Baltic government, Poland, Belarus, Ukraine, and South Russia all kind of make up their own theater. They can all unite the general area before invading Russia. However, the Baltic Freikorps for some reason immediately goes in on the big fish. I don't know, I thought the pacing was just really weird. Anyway, I did focus to get decisions to restore Brest-Litovsk. To get war goals though, I needed to do more focuses. I believed I could take on Poland and Belarus, but I realized the focus would be to immediately declare war and not get a war goals. Still, I had confidence in myself since Belarus was also at war with Ukraine. Belarus went down first since Tukhachevsky was already fighting Ukraine and barely holding on, so taking him down was easy. I then turned my full attention to Poland. However, Ukraine declared war on me before I was fully ready, so I had a brief panic. However, I thought I still had a decent chance at defeating Ukraine, so I continued. I revived the German Klein government in Poland and continued the offensive against anarchist Ukraine. I relied on snaking for this war and it ultimately paid off, but that won't work on every opponent. At the very least, I was able to defeat Ukraine and restore the puppet states in Belarus and Ukraine. With that aside, we can now move our attention to the main goal: the reclamation of the fatherland and the restoration of the Kaiserreich. First step of this is to form a proper faction. We established the Reichspakt, the true successor to the Central Powers. Obviously, we also needed more divisions, and we needed to replenish our stockpiles.
But the Polish Liberation Army under Pilsudski needed to be handled before anything else, as he posed the biggest threat to my puppet government in Poland. Pilsudski has already been in a long guerrilla war against the Spartacus Bund and the Government of National Salvation, but they've managed to hold on. However, they couldn't withstand an intervention by us. We had to split the land with the Spartacus Bund, which ended up looking atrocious. I then declared war on the Spartacus Bund, and they folded pretty quickly. However, after getting cores on them and Silesia, I got the news that the Government of National Salvation had declared Germany united and declared the Free Republic of Germany. I believe this is because their opponents lost their cores on their starting land. This is significant because the Government of National Salvation was actually formed by the Freikorps in Germany proper after the SPD took over. If the Freikorps in Germany stayed as a right-wing state, we could have annexed them peacefully. However, because they are ruled by the SPD, war is the only option. Because Germany is technically united, the Republic now has access to its post-reunification tree, which lets it form an alliance with its neighbors in much of Europe. However, it has been a long time since I played the Freikorps, so I forgot they could do that. Either way, I was confident that I could defeat the Republic, so I declared war. I launched my offensive and managed to capture Berlin. However, they were quick to pull in the rest of their army, so I had to stop. I tried making encirclements, but with so much infantry deployed by the Republic, I could only do so in places where they had little supply. I needed a new plan. Knowing this mod's AI, the Republic would just wail on my lines until they were so battered and weak that I could sweep them up. But that plan went out the window very fast when I noticed the Republic had formed a Europact. It was expanded the front line to an extent I was unprepared for. Of course it was going too well. Nothing comes without a cost in this path. Still, I noticed that the Republic was redirecting a bunch of units to support their allies and was leaving the main front rather unguarded. I decided that my best bet would be to begin an all-out offensive towards all the Republic's victory points. At first, it went okay, but once I reached the Rhine, my lack of supply and manpower caught up with me, and since the Republic allied with the Nordics, they pushed me from the east. Finally, I decided there was nothing I could do and decided to load a save. That hope I gained when I defeated Soviet Russia was starting to fade. If the Republic could form a big alliance and become even stronger, then I might lose after all. Still, I figured there had to be something I could do. Before I invaded the Republic, I had 40 units in training, but canceled them because I thought I needed the equipment. This time though, I would keep them in training, and that ended up being what saved me.
I declared war again, and it went okay. I got pushed back a bit, but overall it could be much worse. The Republic formed a Europact, which made things better. Just then, those 48 divisions I had in training were deployed. I was ready to send them to the front to destroy the Republic. And then the Russian monarchists declared war. I lost hope all over again, as Germany is known for being screwed over by fighting multi-front wars. However, when I looked at Russia's stats, they were shockingly weaker than I expected. Furthermore, they only declared war on me and my Ukrainian puppet, but not my military governments in northern Russia. This meant I could use those 48 divisions to hold off the Russians while my main army began the all-out attack on the Republic. Of course, this was very risky, but I just needed to micro while the offensive was going. The Republic wanted to be a good ally and support their alliance, but it ended up being their downfall. The big offensive, combined with micro, was able to push the Republic over the edge, and since they were the only major in the Europact, the entire alliance surrendered. Genuinely, I felt like crying from joy knowing my biggest hurdle yet was done. With the Europact down and new borders established in Western Europe, I could focus the entire army on Russia. You might think the war in the East would be tough, seeing as my forces were battered after doing a massive offensive against an industrially stronger Republic, but Russia was even weaker. Because of this, I was able to do a massive offensive against them too, and it really didn't hurt that much. With the fatherland secured, the Freikorps could form a proper government that wasn't just a military dictatorship. We declared Germany reunited and reinstated Kaiser Wilhelm II. With the German Empire restored, we had to begin restabilizing everything. Luckily, this didn't hurt the war in Russia, so we could multitask. It took a while since monarchist Russia had a lot of victory points, but eventually we were able to force the Russians to surrender and make sure they never posed a threat again. I partitioned them like crazy. I made a big Ukraine too. At this point, I was wondering if I want to continue recording. I had avenged my defeat in the first Baltic Freikorps video, and recording this was already pretty difficult, so I wasn't sure if I want to continue. After consulting the Collapsing World Discord, I decided that I would continue the campaign until I defeated France and got revenge for the Weltkrieg. We need to prepare for that though, as we're still recovering from the wars with the Republic and the Russians. We can't beat France with just infantry. The war with the Republic proved that. We needed to invest in tanks and fighter planes to effectively counter France. We got some good enough tanks deployed, and because the focus tree wanted me to, I decided that Denmark would be a good testing ground. The operation was tougher than I expected. Since the supply hub we had on the border was not connected for some reason, once it came online, the Danish began to buckle. The tanks even managed to push across the straits without much issue. The trouble only began when we reached Copenhagen. It had no forts, but the garrisons refused to surrender. I had to call Sweden into the war so I could move infantry to Malmö to attack the city from the east too. I also began producing fighter planes. I was going to need them because, as I said, I'm going to be invading the axis of reaction. I believed they would not be a pushover, so I needed an air force. Because I didn't get a proper industry until I united Germany, I couldn't make an air force until then. I didn't have CAS support, so I focused on making as many fighters as I could. So even if I don't have CAS support, the French won't either if I can get air superiority. The axis of reaction has expanded a lot since the game started. So it wasn't just France and its puppets. It included Spain and Britain now, both of which being majors. And I believe the British would be a pain since I don't have a navy, and I really don't like making boats, and the navy system got even worse with the latest DLC. So if I was going to be invading Britain, I would need paratroopers, which are better for invading Britain anyway. I knew the campaign was coming to a close soon, so because it would be more impressive on the thumbnail, I began building a lot of infrastructure in Poland so I could annex them later. If I was going to be annexing Poland though, I needed to deal with the rebels that took over Warsaw a while back. If you're wondering why those rebels exist at all, it's because Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine all got hit with civil wars for some reason. Possibly because I didn't make the decisions to stabilize them. Luckily, all my puppet governments won, but for some reason, the Polish rebels just wiped peace with my puppets, so now they just exist. I couldn't just leave them there. Once I got the war goal, my tanks rolled over Warsaw. Soon enough, I was able to fully annex Poland. At some point, I clicked on a decision to establish a Baltic puppet, but I'm gonna be honest, that was really fucking stupid. You're just giving up core land for no reason other than for roleplay. It gets stupider when I have to remind you that I had to spend hundreds of political power and limited civilian factories to get cores on that land in the first place. So setting up that puppet at all was really dumb. I got mad at myself for that. And since Poland was integrated, I immediately began working on re-annexing the Baltics. I wanted to replace my medium tanks with modern tanks because I figured that would be even more effective against France. So I designed a modern tank. I thought about swapping out the mediums in my tank division for modern tanks, but I thought it would take too long to produce all the modern tanks for that. So instead, I copied the template perfectly, but with modern tanks and not mediums. I thought I would be gradually converting the divisions during the war. I had over 300 divisions at this point, enough to counter France. Of course, they had allies, but with my army going bigger with more infantry, a full tank army, and more advanced fighters being deployed, I was confident I could win the war. I was expecting the Axis forces to be well entrenched, so the modern tanks once deployed should be enough to counter them. Now that I had adequately prepared, I decided there was no reason to stall anymore. It was time to begin the Second Great War and get revenge for the Weltkrieg. I declared war on the French state and its puppets in the Benelux, beginning the Second Great War. I was under the impression it would be a long and difficult war if there was a super event. In the immediate beginning of the war, I noticed that the French had no units in the Netherlands for some reason, so I ordered my tanks to blitz towards Antwerp from there. I activated the battle plan in the Benelux to support the tank offensive, and to my complete surprise, the Axis immediately folded. We easily capitulated the Netherlands and encircled a bunch of Axis forces. Upon realizing how weak France really was, I ordered my army to go ahead with the battle plan. I'm still shocked at how weak France was. I managed to get crippling encirclements without much issue. Just out of Alsace, I got an encirclement of 630,000 soldiers. While I was watching it be cleared out, I got the news that we had already captured Paris. I saw that another 411,000 French soldiers were encircled and killed south of Paris as well. At that point, France ceased to be an actual threat, and I just let the battle plans go. Soon, France surrendered. However, the peace is honestly really disappointing. I only got the Benelux in northern France, including Paris, but the rest of the Axis remained intact and got no punishment. I'm gonna be honest, that's really dumb. The war was apparently big enough to warrant a super event, but ends with France surrendering, and you don't even get all of it. I was fully prepared to invade Spain and do an airborne invasion of Britain, but I got a disappointing peace instead. I think I defeated France so easily because I was still on recruit difficulty, but even then, 500 enemy divisions should still be tough to counter. Still, the war was won, and I had no obligation to continue. Since I defeated France, I unlocked it to Hail Germania focus, which gives you the epilogue for the path. I don't normally read Post-and-Hoy 4 because it's a fucking video game, not a book. Still, it seemed important, and I just finished a really hard path, so I thought it would be a nice way to officially end the campaign. Kaiser Wilhelm, Emperor of Germany, restorer of Europe, sat quietly penning his memoir after the victory parades, the speeches, and the marches. Those always wore him out, made him feel the decades looming upon him. He was not the young man he once was. Perhaps his body wasn't treating him well, but his heart still burned with Germany's spirit bright. Maybe that's why he has lived as long as he has. Many of his fellows have died. Despite losing it all, he had united the Germans once more and brought them farther than he could have ever imagined just 20 years ago. Perhaps he had destroyed the world, but he had fixed it. He fixed his mistakes. He often, as old men do, thought about his family. He had always had one letter in a drawer he sometimes looked at. The final correspondence he had with Nikki. The telegram had turned yellow many years ago, barely held together. It was their last attempt to stop the Great War, a horrible conflict that brought this world to reality. Of course, it didn't work, but he read over those final two sentences again and again. I put all my trust in the wisdom of your friendship and your compassion. Your loving, Nikki. Wisdom, compassion. Things he knew he didn't have at the time. Where did Nikki see that? Was he just trying to please the Kaiser? No, Nikki wasn't like that. He never had an eye for politics. He was honest in his letters, so why deep in his thoughts? The Kaiser hadn't heard the man knocking on the door over and over. Mein Kaiser! Rudiger yelled for the 5th time. He checked his watch. 1709. Was he really this unimportant to the Kaiser that he was late to his meeting? This was the 2nd time this month. He couldn't complain, but he wasn't pleased. A servant passed by as he kept knocking. How come none of them could open the door for him? Why was everything trying to stop him? He felt his rage slowly build up in his bones. This was an important matter, and the leader of his nation couldn't be bothered to see it. Pfft, typical Wilhelm. He was glad his son would take the throne soon. The door clicked open. Rodier suddenly froze as all his thoughts melted from his mind, frozen at the sight of the modern-day Charlemagne, welcoming him into his personal workspace. Forgive me, Von der Goltz. Other matters were on my mind. I must have forgotten to write down our meeting. Now come, let's get you settled. Rudiger nodded sheepishly before following the aging man. Servants had already begun to pour the lager for their 2 men. Rudiger felt so small in the office. Now he remembered why he hated meeting with Wilhelm so much. The 2 men sat down, and Wilhelm now took a sip from the drink before simply asking, "My friend, what has made you so fearful?" Rudiger sighed. Out of all people, why did they decide he had to give him this information? "Mein Kaiser," Rudiger started. "I realize this is terrible news, but during the last several months, paramilitaries have become restless in the nation, likely due to a lack of combat. The more radical ones are even speaking poorly of you. What spooked me was the attack on the armory last night. There are 33 rifles, 3 sniper rifles, and almost 20 kilograms of ammo were taken." The Kaiser's face darkened. "And why haven't the police dealt with this? The army? Anyone? That's what concerns me the most. We haven't found any of the weapons. No evidence. Nothing. We have no leads. The best one we had was a young man who is part of the police force. So what do we do?" The Kaiser, clearly more paranoid, questioned. "Do not worry. I have a plan, mein Kaiser. What we do is The 2 men began discussing in the Kaiser's office. The windows opened to a small courtyard below, and silently, in a tree, a man sat with a mission. "Ludwig, are you in aiming distance?" a walkie-talkie fired. A servant walked through the courtyard quietly. She always enjoyed heading outdoors to just take a break from it all. Court politics, serving the Kaiser, all of it. She walked down to grab a flower that had been growing. She looked up to see the Kaiser rambling on with the general he always seemed to be talking with. It wasn't really her problem, though. She grabbed leaves from the trees. One tree rustled with the wind beautifully. Odd. She couldn't feel a breeze. It is what it is. Her break was almost over. She needed to get back to work now, or Miss Maltz would be off her mind. She quietly began to walk inside, opening the door and closing it.
She got about 6 feet down the hall. In those 3 seconds, the last hope for Kaiser Wilhelm died. What was it like to die? The Kaiser asked himself as he felt a sharp pain in his throat, with the loud ringing in his ears. He had no more than 3 seconds to ask himself a question philosophers had been asking for centuries. He saw Rudier. He had never liked the man, aggressive and bashful. He felt his knees begin to give out. He had so many other things he wanted to do. He saved Germany from implosion. He had fixed his mistakes. No mother would lose her son to another German. But was it really worth it? Generations from now, how would they see him? Another conqueror of Europe just to die for a simple reason. Nobody ever got to choose death, did they? Perhaps that was what he and the French and British, anyone had in common. They were all humans, just like him. He treated them like cows to be sent to the slaughterhouse for an idea of national unity. Death changes how people see things. Perhaps this was his final look at himself in the mirror. He saw the shock in Rudier's face. Pure and utter fear. Time felt like it went too slow, but too fast. The Kaiser fell gagging as Rudier scrambled to get help. Blood choked him, slowly, as he felt himself suffocating. In the chaos, his desk was toppled over to try to help him. He didn't focus on any of that, though. He simply looked at the crumpled telegram that fell out of his drawer. Friendship and your compassion. Perhaps he could ask Nicky about that later. Am I to blame for every misfortune on this earth? I gave my life to the fatherland as my thanks. Germany wept, but he smiled. Owen, I'm done. I redeemed myself for my past failure with this path, and I'm ready to move forward. I don't have this lingering over my head anymore. So, that concludes the story. I came back to a challenge I thought was beyond my skill set, and won. The moral of the story, if there had to be one, is to never give up. Now, you might expect the video to end here, but I have 2 announcements I want to make first. The first one is more like a reminder. I want you guys to like and subscribe, as I have a Soviet Union Mega Mod campaign planned for when I hit 15k subscribers. It will be a 4-part series starting in the Great War Redux. I hate the mod and the developers, I just don't know any ever World War I mod with content for the Soviets. Then moving to Road 56, then Cold War the Iron Curtain, and concluding in Red Dusk. It will only happen at 15k, so if you want to see it happen, subscribe. Secondly, you might remember that recently I concluded my Every American Faction in Kaiser Redux series. I asked in my community tab if you guys want me to start a new series to go alongside my standard videos, and you overwhelmingly said yes. Well, I'm gonna announce it here since this is a Collapsing World video. I will be starting a new series with a similar theme. I will do every German warlord in Collapsing World. Unlike the USA series, this one will likely get bonus episodes since the German Republic and the Wehrkommando Düsseldorf are slated to get reworks this year. I'm especially excited for Düsseldorf, as the Wehrkommando Düsseldorf is not only my favorite warlord, it's my #1 favorite country to play in the mod. That should be everything. We've sat here long enough. There's still some time today left, so even if you got stood up, just talk to friends and family who you know love you, platonically or not. That reminds me, today's my girl's birthday. I gotta go with her as soon as possible.